My wife confessed her deepest secret in Japanese, not realizing I understood every word. We'd been married for 3 years when Aiki finally got pregnant. We were both so happy that she decided to. With her mother. "Konnichiwa," her mom exclaimed. "Hey," I responded. The thing is, I spoke fluent Japanese, but I'd always been too embarrassed of my past anime and manga obsession, so I pretended I didn't understand. Her white American dad, Robert, was already setting up a crib. I helped him, and that's when I heard it. From the kitchen, Ike and her mom were speaking in rapid Japanese. "Matt, no?" her mother asked. "What will you do when he finds out it's Matt's baby?" My hand froze on the screwdriver. Ike laughed. "Kira Bakadakara. He doesn't know he's an idiot. You okay there?" Robert noticed I'd stopped working. I let my voice crack. "Just emotional, thinking about becoming a dad." I made sure to project my voice toward the kitchen. "I've dreamed about this my whole life." From the kitchen, they exploded into Japanese laughter. "Kawu. Poor thing. Yumiu, he's dreaming." I smirked. You see, I'd watched dozens of cheating stories on TikTok, and I knew the only way out was to let the hoe dig her own grave. The more emotional I appeared, the more free ammunition they'd give me to destroy them. Over the next few days, I played my part perfectly. I accidentally left my laptop open to baby name websites. I made sure they saw me reading parenting books. That weekend, we were watching anime on the couch, and a character made an irresistible pun in Japanese. I couldn't help it. I laughed. The subtitle even appeared. Icky's head snapped toward me. "Why did you laugh?" Her voice was sharp. I kept my eyes on the screen. "Oh, the physical comedy is funny. The way he fell." "Sorwa," her mother muttered. "That was strange." Yuniki agreed quietly. "Yeah." A few nights later at dinner, I decided to twist the knife a little. Robert was carving a roast while the women set the table. I said casually, reaching for the potatoes. "I was thinking about downloading Duolingo for Japanese. Would be nice to understand what you and your mom talk about." Icky's fork clattered onto her plate. "No." She cleared her throat, forcing a smile. "I mean, it's so hard. You'll never learn it. Why waste your time?" The real game began when I got my promotion. "Honey." I burst through the door one evening, knowing her mom was visiting. "My boss pulled me aside today," he said with the baby coming. I paused dramatically. "I'm getting a $15,000 bonus." Aiki hugged me. "Oh, baby, that's wonderful." But the second I went to check on dinner, I heard the Japanese. "Yugo Sandor 15,000. Mato Hikadasadiru, we can extract more." That night, I pushed further. "I've been thinking maybe I should get a second job. I want our baby to have everything." Icky's eyes lit up. "Really? I could do Uber after work. Maybe sell my gaming collection. Whatever it takes." She quit her job that afternoon, but not before sending a bridge-burning email calling her boss sexist, her coworkers incompetent, and the company a toxic hellhole. She showed me proudly like she'd done something brave. "Are you sure that was wise?" I asked carefully. "Who cares? I have you." But here's what she didn't know. I'd already found Matt. My private investigator had tracked him down, and he was very interested to know about the baby he'd paid $5,000 to avoid. The family gathering was the masterpiece. I suggested hosting Icky's extended family for a pregnancy celebration, knowing alcohol would loosen their lips. "Tell them about Matt," her mother urged in Japanese after the third wine. "They'll think it's funny." I busied myself with food, phone recording from my pocket as Ike giggled with her cousins about how she was screwing me over. Some laughed, others looked horrified. Her aunt tried to shush her, but Ike was on a roll. "Mata Nanita, Mata Onaji, Kodasuru. If I get pregnant again, I'll do the same thing." That's when I made my move. I walked in with appetizers, smiling blankly. "What are you all laughing about?" I wish I could understand. The guilty silence was deafening. Several cousins couldn't meet my eyes. "Just girl talk," Icky slurred. Even though we agreed she wouldn't drink alcohol about babies, I asked innocently. "I love baby talk. Even if I can't understand the language, I can feel the joy." That evening, I scheduled a work trip for the following week, then made sure I knew I'd be gone for 3 days. What she didn't know was that I'd be in town working with my lawyer and the private investigator, or that the security system I'd surprised her with had audio recording in every room. As I kissed her goodbye, she was already on the phone with her mother, planning Jason's visit, a new boyfriend she had lined up. The next morning, I sat in my car outside a coffee shop, phone connected to my laptop, transferring the audio files to 3 different cloud accounts. My hands shook as I listened again to Aiki's voice saying she'd do it all over if she got pregnant a second time. And I had to pause the playback to breathe through the anger that squeezed my chest. This wasn't just evidence of what she'd done. It was proof of who she actually was. Someone who saw me as a resource to exploit rather than a person to respect. I labeled each file with dates and timestamps, creating a system that would let me find specific conversations later if I needed them. The recording from the family party was the longest, over 2 hours of Japanese chatter that included at least 15 minutes of direct discussion about Matt and the baby. I made notes in a separate document, translating key phrases and marking the exact timestamps where Ike or her mother said something particularly damning. By the time I finished organizing everything, it was nearly noon and my coffee had gone cold. I pulled up Maria Whitaker's number and called her office, my stomach tight with nervous energy about finally laying all this out for someone else to examine. She answered on the second ring with a brisk, steadying tone. I told her I had recordings from the family party and new information about Jason, and she told me to bring everything I had and come by at 3. Her voice was calm and matter-of-fact, as if this were just another case instead of my life falling apart, and somehow that professional distance made it easier to breathe. I spent the next 2 hours at a coffee shop reviewing my notes, making sure I could explain the context of each recording without getting too emotional. I needed to present the facts clearly, to show a pattern of deception rather than just unload my anger. Maria's office was in a modest strip mall between a dry cleaner and a tax service. An unglamorous setting that felt fitting for the work of documenting betrayal. Inside, the walls were lined with certificates and generic landscape photos. Maria sat behind a desk cluttered with files and a laptop ringed with coffee stains. She looked about 50, with short gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She gestured for me to sit and pulled out a legal pad. I played selected clips of the Japanese conversations, pausing after each one to translate and explain who was speaking. She took notes in quick, neat handwriting, occasionally asking me to replay a section or clarify a phrase. When I reached the part where Icky's had tried to shush her at the party, Maria looked up and asked if any other family members had seemed uncomfortable. I told her about the cousins who wouldn't meet my eyes afterward, and she marked the note with a star. She then explained that while the recordings might not be admissible in court, depending on state law, they were still incredibly useful for building a full picture and identifying potential witnesses. Judges often view secret recordings with suspicion, she said, especially in divorce cases. We just need to be strategic about how and when to use them. Frustration rose in my chest. I'd worked so hard to gather that evidence, but she held up a hand. The recordings weren't useless, she said. They told us who knew what and when, which meant we could trace those leads through texts, financial records, and witness statements instead of relying solely on audio. She suggested we treat the recordings as a roadmap, not the destination. I understood her logic, even if part of me just wanted to play the tapes in court and watch Icky's face when everyone heard the truth. That evening, I kept up my distant but present act with her, answering questions about my day with vague mentions of work and deadlines. She sat scrolling through baby furniture websites, asking for my opinion on cribs that all looked the same to me. I gave polite, non-committal answers, every word feeling like it belonged to a different reality than the one I was actually living in. She showed me a changing table she liked, and I nodded, already knowing I'd never use any of it. The disconnect between what she believed and what I knew made my head ache, but I kept my face neutral. When she asked if I was okay, I told her I was just tired, and she accepted that without question. That night, I scheduled a consultation with Wallace Greco, a family law attorney Maria had recommended, who specialized in complex divorce and paternity disputes. His phone screening was thorough, covering the timeline of Aiki's pregnancy, when I first suspected the affair, and what evidence I had so far. He explained his fees clearly and told me to bring copies of our financial statements, the marriage certificate, and any documents related to the pregnancy. I spent the rest of the evening organizing everything into labeled folders, creating a timeline that began with Aiki's mother re-entering her life and ended with Jason's planned visit during my fake work trip. The mechanical act of sorting papers made me feel like I was taking control instead of drowning in chaos. Wallace's office was in a downtown high-rise with a faint smell of carpet cleaner and soft elevator music playing in the background. His calm professionalism immediately steadied me. He shook my hand firmly, offered coffee, and reviewed my documents methodically, asking precise questions and jotting notes on his own pad. When we got to the recordings, he explained that paternity challenges are most effective when filed right after birth, before I signed any birth certificate or acknowledgement of paternity. Wallace warned me that the recordings of the Japanese conversations would likely be inadmissible and could even work against me if a judge saw them as vindictive surveillance. I felt my jaw tighten at that, but he met my eyes and said he understood my frustration. He just needed me to understand the legal reality we were working within. He outlined a filing sequence, starting with legal separation, followed by a paternity challenge once the baby was born and DNA results were available. Prenatal paternity testing was possible, he explained, but courts preferred post-birth results for official proceedings. Any test I arranged now would be for personal knowledge only. When I asked about protecting my finances in the meantime, he advised opening a separate bank account and documenting all marital expenses. As a spouse, before any separation filing, I had the legal right to transfer half of our joint savings into my own account, and he told me to do that immediately to prevent Aiki from draining the funds once she realized I knew. He also recommended tracking every dollar she spent, creating a paper trail that would reveal her spending habits and financial dependence. That afternoon, I opened a new account at a different branch of our bank, somewhere no one would recognize me or mention it to Aiki. I transferred exactly half of our savings, just over $11,000, and felt a grim satisfaction at taking that first concrete step. I started a spreadsheet on my laptop, logging every baby purchase, grocery receipt, and utility bill. The clinical act of recording numbers made me feel like I was building a case rather than drowning in betrayal. Each entry became another piece of evidence, another fact that would matter later. I even added formulas to calculate her monthly spending and compare it to what she used to contribute when she was still working, creating a clear picture of her financial dependence. That evening, while I was in the kitchen making dinner, I heard Aiki speaking rapid Japanese to her mother in the living room. I moved closer to the doorway, pretending to check something in the pantry, and caught her saying something about moving money into her mother's account, just in case. My stomach dropped. She was already thinking about hiding assets, which meant some part of her suspected I knew something, or at least sensed that things weren't right between us. I made a mental note to tell Wallace about the conversation at our next meeting and decided to check our accounts daily for unusual transfers. If she was already planning defensive moves, I had to stay ahead, keep gathering evidence, keep building my case before she could cover her tracks. That night, I waited until past midnight, after Aiki had fallen asleep, before opening my laptop in the home office. I logged into our router's admin panel using the password I'd set up when we first moved in, a password she didn't know existed. The connection logs loaded slowly, rows of IP addresses and timestamps stretching back weeks. I scrolled through them, looking for patterns, and there it was. Starting 3 weeks ago, video calls between 11 p.m. and midnight, always after I'd gone to bed. The destination IP was the same each time, and the sessions lasted between 30 and 45 minutes. I took screenshots of every log entry, saved them in a hidden folder, then emailed the files to Maria with a short message asking her to trace the IP and confirm whether it belonged to Jason. My hands shook slightly as I hit send. Another piece of evidence locked down. Maria's reply came the next afternoon while I was at work. The IP address belonged to an apartment complex on the west side of town. Jason Martinez, 28, Unit 3B. She'd already run a background check, Sales job at a tech company downtown. No criminal record. Single. Based on social media filled with gym selfies and photos of his dog. I sat in my car during lunch, reading her email, trying to process the bizarre triangle I was stuck in. Ike was pregnant with Matt's baby, married to me, and already setting up her next relationship with Jason. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't actively destroying my life. I forwarded Maria's findings to my personal backup email and added Jason's details to my spreadsheet. That evening, I searched online for therapists who specialized in betrayal trauma and divorce preparation. I found Devora Gay's profile, a counselor in her 50s with kind eyes and gray hair in the photo. Her intake form asked about my emotional state, whether I had thoughts of harming myself or others, my support system, and my therapy goals. I filled it out honestly, sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot. I wrote that I was angry and hurt, but not dangerous. Just desperate for a place to process everything without falling apart or doing something I'd regret. I submitted the form and got an automated reply saying someone would contact me within 24 hours. The next morning, Devora's office called, and I scheduled my first session for Thursday afternoon. Her office was in a small building near the hospital, the waiting room furnished with comfortable chairs and unread magazines, the kind of neutral space that could belong to any professional. Devora greeted me with a warm handshake and led me into her office, where two armchairs faced each other across a small table. Once I started talking, everything spilled out at once. She listened quietly, taking the occasional note, her face calm and unreadable. When I finally stopped, she asked what I hoped to achieve with all this evidence gathering. I told her I wanted to expose Ike publicly to make sure everyone knew what she'd done. Devora nodded, then asked if that would help my healing or just feed my anger. The question hit harder than I expected and lingered long after I left. Over the next week, I began quietly moving my things out during lunch breaks. I rented a small storage unit across town, fluorescent lights, rolling doors, climate control. I took my parents' photo albums first, then my dad's old letters to my mom, and a few heirloom pieces of furniture. Each trip felt like dismantling the life I thought I'd built. I photographed everything as I stored it, creating proof of what was mine. I can notice the missing wedding photo on Thursday evening while dusting. She asked where it went, and I told her I'd taken it to get the frame repaired. She accepted the lie easily, the same way she'd lied to me for months. The photo was wrapped safely in my storage box, labeled with my parents' names. The next day, Maria called with news about Matt. She'd arranged a meeting under a vague legal pretext and invited me to observe from a distance. I agreed immediately. Saturday morning, I arrived early at the coffee shop, disguised in sunglasses and a baseball cap. From my seat 3 rows back, I watched as Matt joined Maria. At first, he looked confused, then visibly distressed when she mentioned Ike's name, running his hands through his hair, shaking his head, his legs bouncing under the table. After about 40 minutes, Maria stood, they shook hands, and he left quickly, looking rattled. When I joined her, Maria quietly filled me in. Matt had admitted everything, the affair, the $5,000 payment, all of it. He said Ike told him she'd handle it, assuming that meant an abortion or passing the baby off as mine. He seemed shocked to learn she'd kept the pregnancy and that I now knew. Maria had recorded the entire conversation with his consent and handed me a business card with a code to access the file on her secure server. That night, after Ike went to bed, I stood in the bathroom staring at my reflection, practicing how I'd confront her. I imagined revealing that I spoke Japanese, watching her face change as she realized I'd understood everything. I pictured playing the recordings, making her sit through the proof of her betrayal. But every version felt wrong, too dramatic, or too weak. I couldn't find words that expressed everything without losing control. After an hour, I gave up and lay awake beside her, replaying impossible conversations in my head. The next morning, Wallace called while I was making coffee. He got straight to business, asking about my work trip and the security system, then said something that made my stomach drop. I needed to be careful about recording laws, he warned. If we lived in a 2-party consent state, all my recordings could be illegal, even criminal. I sat down hard on my toolbox, suddenly sick. The thought that I could go to jail for gathering evidence hadn't crossed my mind. He promised to check the laws and told me to stop recording until we were sure. I spent the rest of the morning searching online, scrolling through legal sites with shaking hands. Finally, I found it. Our state was one-party consent. I could legally record any conversation I was part of or that happened in my home. The relief hit so hard I had to sit down. Wallace called back an hour later to confirm, but cautioned that even legal recordings could look bad if they seemed like entrapment. I needed to document real behavior, not provoke it. I told him I understood. 2 days later, while Ike was at a doctor's appointment, I installed the new security system, small cameras hidden in the living room, kitchen, and hallway, each with audio capability. It took about 90 minutes to set up and test. When she got home, I showed her the app and explained how we could monitor the house remotely, especially useful with the baby coming. She smiled and said she felt safer. She had no idea she'd just approved her own surveillance. That night, during dinner, she suddenly grabbed her stomach and gasped. My fork hit the plate as I jumped up, all anger forgotten. She said the pain was sharp, worse than before. I grabbed her purse and keys, helping her to the car. The 12-minute drive to the hospital felt like an hour. At the ER, nurses rushed her into a room while I paced outside, torn between worry and everything else tangled in my head. After 30 minutes, the doctor came out and said it was round ligament pain, common, harmless, just the uterus stretching.